Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy everybody, and welcome to the month in review for August 2024. There's a lot of stuff to go over, so let's not waste any time and get into it. As always, let's begin with the honorable mentions from the July painting competition. The winners, as always, are posted on the Discord so you can see them there. But here, I want to recognize those painters that I think did an excellent job, but for some reason just didn't get enough votes to be on the podium. So in the solo category, first up we have Daniel Dempsey, who gives us a proper lesson on object source lighting. Honestly, I don't know why this wasn't one of the top 3. Sure, most of the miniature is in gray, but do you know how hard it is to paint something all gray but still have depth, highlight, shadow, and detail? And then for the light source, yeah, that could be mostly an airbrush, but look at how the light hits the fabric of his tabard. And some of it's even visible on the inside of his cloak. And I do believe that I can see brush strokes in there. So while the bright yellow on the shield may have been an airbrush, I don't think all of it was. So nice job, Daniel. I would love to see an entire unit or army painted with that scheme. Moving on, we have Gideon Snell. And while he has some really nice colors and highlights on the skin and cloth, the reason I wanted to give this an honorable mention is because of the smoke underneath. He has an excellent mix of blues and grays to make a bold smoke cloud, but he's also used subtle reds, oranges, and browns to give a hint of flames underneath the smoke. I can see lots of carefully placed layers, and it achieves a really nice effect. Next up, we have Ninja. It's another one of those undead paladin models, and the first thing your eye is drawn to is that shield. By using what looks to me like about 3 different shades of blue, Ninja has really accented the shield's curvature. I can also see great highlighting on the cloth, the bones, and the hair. The only thing holding this model back is the metal. Ninja, I think it's time you start experimenting with non-metallic metal, because based on that shield, you've got the technique down. And if you start painting the metal like you painted the shield, you are going to have some darn nice pieces. Finally, in the solo category, is Lewis Cooper. He has almost a half dozen major colors on this model, but it doesn't look too loud or too messy. The red cloth stands out next to the blue and the green skin. The bones are a nice contrast for all 3, plus the base has just enough attention to round out the model without stealing the show. I think an entire army done up like this would look beautiful on any tabletop. Now, jumping over to the unit category, Jacek Klemka is going the other route for the Shadow Stalkers, doing darker and grungier rather than bright and colorful. And while I do think having almost the same color for the smoke and the cloth make them blend into each other a little bit too much, I think the execution was very, very clean. Look at that smoky mist on the unit leader. The smoke transitions from almost black to a very, very light, almost white green, but it looks natural and it has a really good gradation. Up next is Ryan Reeves, and I must just be a sucker for object source lighting because I'm not very good at it, but I really enjoy looking at people who can do it well, and I think Ryan has a great idea here. Very dark and gray, but with a super bright and contrasting pink. Given that this army are the Shadow Stalkers, a paint scheme that depicts them mostly in shadow, only illuminated by a tiny bit of light, I think is a fantastic idea. And I'm not sure if those pink sections on the base are supposed to be solid rays of light and are supposed to look like that, but even if they are, Ryan, you've got to finish the basing. You've got some great models here, and giving them a base will only make them look better. Finally, my last honorable mention goes to Spoonweasel. He has a very clean, crisp look to these, and the deep blue mists contrast nicely with the black, red, and green on the rest of the model. It's striking a great balance between colorful and grimdark, and so it will fit well in either one. The only suggestion I could make here is to paint the texture on the base. While the gravel has color and texture of its own, it's too natural and it's too realistic, and it contrasts with the shades and the highlights of your models. So give it a coat of paint, or at the very least a wash and a dry brush, so that it aligns with the style and presentation with the rest of the unit. Now, there's nothing to mention in the legendary category. There were only 4 entries, which means all 3 either won a prize, and now that OPR has added a random entry to show along with the winners, everyone who submitted something for legendary, they can already be seen. Moving on, our next item. Mini Wargaming is going to start selling OnePageRules miniatures. Up until now, Only Games was the primary source for purchasing models, but they are located in Britain, meaning that you have additional taxes, shipping costs, and wait time if you're ordering in North America. Now that Mini Wargaming is printing minis, folks in North America have a much closer supplier. Now, this is a bit of an interesting development, because the recent survey of OnePageRules community showed that the majority of people who filled out that survey aren't interested in buying minis and would rather just print their own. However, that was only a 59% majority, which means that 40% of the people who filled out that survey would be interested. And if that survey only represents even a fraction of players, that means there are thousands of people who would be willing to purchase pre-printed minis. So it makes sense that OPR would team up with an established entity like Mini Wargaming to expand their physical offerings. The next bit of big news is that the Age of Fantasy Worldbook will be released in September. It has been confirmed. It's going to have everything that the Grimdark Future Worldbook has, which means I'm going to need to step up the pace of my Grimdark Future Worldbook deep dive so I don't fall too far behind when this one comes out. Now, as with the Grimdark Future book, the new Worldbook will showcase lots of new artwork. And after seeing this one in the preview, I'm really excited to see what else is in there. I do hope that one day, OnePageRules starts selling prints of their artwork. In the recent YouTube live stream, OnePageRules also mentioned that the next update and clarification of the rules will take place in conjunction with the Worldbook, but that's something for the month of September review, so we're going to move on from here. Okay, moving on. We now have something for Grimdark Future. OnePageRules recently announced The Edge of the Radiance, a narrative campaign based on a conflict between the Eternal Dynasty and the alien hives. I believe that this is the Grimdark Future equivalent to The Secrets of Tixal. And yeah, I know Thanos says Tishal, but the Lizardmen or the Saurians are clearly based on Aztec history and culture, and I don't call the country south of the United States Mexico. Anyways, this means that more named characters are going to be added to army rosters on each side of the campaign, along with missions based on the storyline. Now, I've been recording videos using the Assault on Malhadra campaign, and they have been a ton of fun. I would be very curious to see how well OnePageRules can adapt narrative missions to larger games in the Grimdark Future. So this is set to release in October. While we're on the subject of Grimdark Future, OnePageRules announced that in their latest live stream that the Grimdark Future is getting its own version of Quest called StarQuest. It's planned to release in October, and it will essentially be the Age of Fantasy Quest game just with the Grimdark Future sci-fi skin. Tano's own words. The thing that I'm most excited about, though, and OPR confirmed this in the live stream, is that like Age of Fantasy Quest, OnePageRules is going to be releasing new models which can be used in the Quest game for your specific heroes, but they can also double in Grimdark Future games as unit commanders, heroes, special pieces like that. Next up, OnePageRules held the 11th Writing Jam recently, giving players and fans a chance to contribute to the lore and world building of both the Grimdark Future and the Age of Fantasy. There aren't many game systems out there that do something like this, so if you're a budding or aspiring author, keep an eye out for the next one. They're only held about 2 to 3 times each year, so if you're interested in participating, make sure you keep an eye out for the next one. Finally, let's take a look at the August releases for STL model designs. First, OnePageRules has released a set of scatter terrain in an urban setting. These look like great generic terrain pieces that you could use on just about any board that has buildings, walls, or infrastructure. In fact, I believe Square Table Union printed up some of these, and they looked really, really nice. So I think you definitely want to supplement them with larger buildings and ruins, but these would be great pieces to fill in those big blank spaces that you sometimes end up with after building your tabletop. Next we have the Age of Fantasy quest model, a War Demon Barbarian. Now while I can appreciate casting against type, and I do like the general look of it, I am having a bit of trouble reconciling a Rift Demon traversing the Great Plains or the steppe long enough to acquire animal skin and a traditional wooden axe. The last model released was an undead paladin, and I think between that and this, I'm seeing a bit of a pattern that the models are going for really unusual pairings of race and class. So we might need to be on the lookout for a chivalrous kingdom rogue, an ogre thief, or a halfling berserker. Moving on, we have the High Elf Fleet jet bikes. There are a lot of variations, so I'm only going to show a general depiction of them here. Overall, I like them. They definitely have that sleek, angular appearance that you think of when you imagine sci-fi high elves. The riders aren't just leaning forward, they're almost having to lie prone, giving you an impression that these bikes are going so fast that they have to lay low and essentially become one with the bike. I was actually getting vibes of the light cycles from the old Tron movie, not the new one. The new one was terrible. But I especially like the heavy weapon variety, where the gunner stands on the back gripping that swivel turret, and I can picture a squad of these bikes buzzing around like flies while the gunner is blasting away all over the place. Nicely done overall. I'm also liking the Shadow Stalkers too. The Butcher Champion really does well with the whole unsettling design that this army is having in general. As I've mentioned before, none of the models have eyes, and this guy continues on with that. But with the 4 arms, 2 of them holding a great weapon at rest while the other 2 have a sword and shield in a more dynamic pose, really gives this model a striking look because it's a series of contradictions and paradoxes. Personally, I'd go with the 2-handed sword over the great mace, and I would definitely take the helmet that's channeling Sauron instead of that mask playing peekaboo. I'm also a pretty big fan of the Reaper Great Flayer, if for no other reason than that double-edged runic blade he's carrying. I can think of all kinds of cool ideas on how to paint that I probably could never execute. But the blade design begs to break away from the standard steel look in favor of colored blades with bright runic accents. I think I'd maybe go for something like an obsidian blade with either blood red or bright purple runes. Seriously, I'm not even looking at the rest of the model. I really like that weapon. The Stalker Tormentors look like your standard infantry, nice animalistic poses that give them this primal feral look. And while I was checking them out on my mini factory, I noticed that someone had actually already printed and painted up some of them and built a diorama out of it. So kudos to NTJ for the design and the execution, and, of course, for doing the object source lighting. Now these flayers look good as a cavalry unit. I think the axes look best and really give the unit a menacing kind of a pose. And the mounts again show off how creepy it is when something doesn't have eyes. And not only that, they have horns where the eyes are supposed to be. So really good job there. Now here we have one of the larger pieces of the army, and I think the truth here will be in the painting. Those wings are designed to look like smoky tendrils trailing off the wings. The right painter will be able to make them look absolutely amazing, but a few mistakes could make it look like this guy has wings made out of cotton candy. So approach with care, all ye who paint here. And while we're looking at big things...
That's what she said!
Here's a diorama piece from the Saurians. Now, I may have heard this wrong, but in a previous live stream, it sounded like OPR was doing this instead of a Titanic model. If I heard that right, I really hope not. Every army should have some big centerpiece with rules to match it. And while this diorama will look beautiful when it's painted, it's still just a squad of cavalry. Now, OPR already has STLs for 2 massive Saurian monsters, so I think maybe I heard wrong that this was some kind of a replacement. But it is a bit odd that the Saurians get a Titanic model and this diorama, unless the goal is to eventually give every army some kind of a diorama like this one. Great for collectors, painters, and hobbyists. For gamers, maybe not as much. Last of all, the mummified undead are being updated so that some of the units in the army will have models that better match. In the case here, you now have an army standard that looks really nice, but it also looks like it's going to be super top heavy. You are definitely going to want to put a coin under that base to balance it out. The Herald also looks really good and has plenty of options for armaments. If I'm being honest here, I think this one here would be more of a paladin than that undead paladin that was shown previously. And this guy here would be a fantastic paladin or warrior as well. Now, there is one element of the Mummy update that I'm not so excited about. Those who have been watching these reviews of mine for a couple months know now that I'm not a big fan of the sidekick animals that are getting added to armies like the High Elf fleets, and now it seems the mummified undead. It's just a bit too cutesy for me, and for a world that bears the name Grimdark, well, they're being added to the mummified undead. Like this guy here, and now he has a cute little rhino beetle on his shoulder, and I'm sure he sneaks at little tidbits at dinner. This warrior here also apparently goes to war with one of these beetles on his shoulder too. Come on guys, not every warrior needs to be Minsk and Boo. And this one has a pet scorpion. Now at least that's not nearly as adorable as the ones you saw on the High Elf fleets, and it's more in theme with the desert, although of course the scarab beetles fit in as well. But, I mean, you've got a giant scorpion as part of the army. Did you really need to add little scorpions too? And this is a personal note, I used to live in Arizona. The first time you find an uninvited scorpion in your bedroom, you just lose the desire to ever have one as a pet, or worst of all, have one crawling on you. So when I see this here, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies. And then lastly here you have scorpions riding scorpions. It seems that undead arachnids also have Take Your Daughter to Work Day. Okay folks, so that's it for One Page Rules in the month of August. Let me know what you think. Be sure to check in next time because it sounds like there's going to be a lot coming down the pike in September and in October. So I'll see you then. Until next time, keep your dice on the table.